I woke up in shock, my hand reaching for the hair that had always been my pride, only to feel jagged, uneven ends. The long auburn hair I had cherished for over a decade was gone. When I stumbled into the bathroom, I found it stuffed into the trash can like evidence of a crime. Downstairs, my parents sat calmly at the kitchen table as if nothing had happened. My mother smirked and called it justice for your sister's big day. My father didn't even flinch, he just said, "Now maybe someone will finally pity you." The betrayal cut deeper than the scissors ever could. Tomorrow was my sister's wedding. I was supposed to stand by her side as maid of honor. Instead, I had been humiliated, stripped of something that defined me. They thought they had destroyed me. What they didn't know was that they had just awakened a side of me they had never seen before. This wasn't going to end with me hiding in shame. No, this was the beginning of a plan that would turn their cruelty into my triumph. A plan that would make everyone see the truth they had tried so hard to hide. In the next 30 seconds, you'll hear a story of betrayal so raw it will make you question what family really means. And if you stay with me until the end, I promise you'll witness a revenge so calculated, so devastating, that it left a bride, a groom, and 2 parents speechless on what was supposed to be the happiest day of their lives. Rachel Carter was 26 years old when she first decided to tell her story. She worked as an interior designer in a mid-sized American city, a career that reflected her eye for detail and her quiet determination to make beauty out of chaos. She had built a modest but promising life for herself, far enough from her childhood home to breathe freely, yet still close enough that family obligations constantly tugged her back. For most of her life, Rachel had been known for her auburn hair that fell to her waist, a feature that strangers often admired, and one she had cared for with patience and pride. But her story was not about vanity. It was about family, and how beneath the surface of a home that seemed picture-perfect, shadows had always lingered. From the outside, the Carters looked like the model of small-town success. Edward Carter. Her father was a respected insurance agent who coached Little League on weekends. Linda Carter, her mother, worked as a school counselor, always quick with advice and a smile for other people's children. And then there was Amanda, Rachel's sister, 3 years older, tall, outspoken, and treated as the family's crown jewel. When neighbors saw the Carters, they saw achievement, stability, and a kind of glossy harmony that drew admiration. What few realized was that inside those walls, the balance of love and attention tilted in ways that would mark Rachel's life forever. Rachel could still recall when she and Amanda were inseparable. They shared a bedroom lined with floral wallpaper and twin beds pushed up against opposite walls. At night, they whispered across the room, trading secrets, making up silly songs, and dreaming aloud about the weddings they would have someday. They built elaborate Barbie houses out of cardboard boxes, draped blankets over chairs to make pretend chapels, and giggled over which stuffed animals would serve as their guests. In those moments, Rachel believed in the closeness of sisters. To her younger self, Amanda was not only an older sister, but a protector, someone who would always be there to lean on. Those memories remained vivid and bittersweet, a reminder of what once felt unshakable. But childhood bonds can be fragile. The turning point came when Rachel entered her teenage years, and their mother signed Amanda up for local beauty pageants. Amanda was 8 at the time, and Rachel, only 5, begged to be included. By the time she reached 13, Rachel had grown into her looks in a way that startled even her family. That year, she competed for the Junior Miss Sunshine State title, a pageant Amanda had entered twice before without success. Rachel not only participated, she won. She stood under the bright lights in her sash and crown, while Amanda clapped stiffly from the wings. Rachel could still picture Amanda's arms around her in what should have been a warm congratulation, but the smile had not reached her sister's eyes. That night, Rachel noticed Amanda turning to the wall in silence instead of whispering goodnight. It was the first of many small ruptures. From then on, Amanda began to measure herself against Rachel in ways Rachel never anticipated. If Rachel brought home a test graded with an A, Amanda would remark that she had scored an A+ when she took the same class. If Rachel was asked to a school dance, Amanda would casually mention the boy had asked her first a year earlier. What seemed harmless comparisons carried an edge that Rachel did not understand until she was older. She learned to quiet her pride to downplay her accomplishments because she could sense how each success of hers deepened the tension with Amanda. At one point, Rachel was even offered the chance to skip a grade in school. She turned it down, fearing that graduating alongside Amanda would only heighten the rivalry. Their parents, though they likely never meant harm, made the situation worse with their attempts to keep the peace. When Rachel achieved something notable, Edward or Linda would make a show of lifting Amanda up. If Rachel received an award at school, Amanda would receive an expensive gift the following week. If Rachel's teachers praised her, Linda would schedule a mother-daughter day out with Amanda, complete with shopping and ice cream, framing it as much-needed bonding. The message was not subtle. Rachel's triumphs had to be counterbalanced to protect Amanda's feelings. Instead of celebrating both daughters for who they were, the parents created an invisible scale that tipped heavily in Amanda's favor. Over time, Rachel learned a coping strategy that felt both protective and painful. She made herself smaller. She held her tongue when relatives complimented her hair or her grades. She shrugged off invitations that might have placed her in the spotlight. In her heart, she believed that by diminishing herself, she was preserving her family's fragile harmony. It was a trade-off she made again and again, sacrificing pieces of her own light so Amanda could shine brighter. For a while, it worked well enough. Holidays passed without open conflict, and family photos showed smiling faces. Yet beneath that surface lay unspoken truths. Amanda's simmering resentment, her parents' constant indulgence, and Rachel's quiet ache at being the daughter who could never win without somehow losing. Looking back, Rachel could see the pattern clearly. The Carter family, admired by neighbors and colleagues, carried a hidden fracture. Amanda had been raised to expect the spotlight, and whenever Rachel's natural gifts drew attention, the family machinery turned to restore Amanda's primacy. The irony was bitter. Rachel had never sought competition with her sister. She had wanted closeness, partnership, the kind of bond they had shared in childhood whispers across twin beds. Instead, she learned that her achievements would always be measured not on their own merit, but against the insecurity they sparked in Amanda. And while Rachel accepted this arrangement for years, dimming her own accomplishments for the sake of peace, the seeds of something darker had been planted. Those seeds would eventually grow into the betrayal that changed everything. It was in this carefully polished family, one admired on the outside, yet riddled with imbalance inside, that the story truly began. Rachel's life, her quiet sacrifices, and her willingness to shrink herself to protect Amanda's feelings all set the stage for the moment when the imbalance could no longer be hidden. What she could not know then was that every compromise, every time she chose silence, was pushing her closer to the day her family would cross a line so shocking it would leave them exposed before the world. That day was still ahead, but the patterns were already etched deeply into the story of the Carters. And as Rachel later reflected, it all began with the illusion of a perfect family. The fragile balance within the Carter family might have lasted longer had it not been for a man named David Miller. Rachel was 26, and already establishing herself as a thoughtful creative designer, often attending networking events connected to her firm. It was at one of these gatherings hosted at the offices of a large financial company whose space she had helped design that she first met David. He was 32, handsome in a conventional polished way with dark hair and sharp blue eyes. Their introduction was casual at first, but Rachel remembered how naturally the conversation flowed. David asked her about the layout choices she had made in his company's new executive suites, seemed genuinely interested in her process, and even lingered to hear her describe how lighting could affect both mood and productivity. For nearly an hour they spoke as though the busy reception around them did not exist. It was not romantic, but there was a warmth in the way he laughed at her observations and offered his own insights into corporate culture. Rachel found herself comfortable, something she rarely felt in those crowded, image-conscious events. She might have chalked it up to nothing more than professional chemistry had Amanda not appeared. Her sister entered the conversation with a practiced brightness that drew attention away immediately, inserting herself and finding ways to redirect David's gaze. Rachel, ever cautious of upsetting the delicate family equilibrium, excused herself politely to tend to other guests. When she glanced back, Amanda and David were already exchanging phone numbers. Amanda's smile triumphant. Rachel told herself it was a fleeting connection, but a small knot of unease settled in her stomach. 6 months later, that unease returned with force when the family gathered for a celebratory dinner at a favorite local restaurant. Amanda had orchestrated the occasion under the guise of an ordinary family meal, but Rachel could sense the anticipation humming beneath the surface. When the entrees had been cleared and wine glasses refilled, Amanda pushed back her chair with a theatrical flourish, held out her hand, and revealed a gleaming diamond ring. David proposed, she announced, her voice ringing with triumph. The table erupted in exclamations. Linda pressing her hands to her face in feigned surprise, Edward clapping his eldest daughter on the shoulder with paternal pride. Through it all, Amanda's eyes flickered repeatedly to Rachel, as though her sister's reaction mattered more than the congratulations pouring in from their parents. Rachel forced a smile that was not forced at all, for she was genuinely happy that Amanda had found stability. Yet she could not ignore the way Amanda studied her expression, searching for a crack, a hint of jealousy that would prove Rachel had been wounded. Linda quickly filled the air with praise, her words rising higher and faster than usual. She called Amanda our shining star and gushed about what a catch David was, emphasizing how Amanda deserved the best after so many years of uncertainty. Edward followed suit, raising his glass and toasting to Amanda's future. Rachel joined in, lifting her glass and offering kind words of her own. But even as she spoke, she felt the weight of the subtext. Linda and Edward's enthusiasm seemed laced with an undercurrent that diminished Rachel by omission. No one asked about her own life or acknowledged her steady work, her patience, her loyalty. Instead, all energy bent toward affirming Amanda's victory, as if Rachel's role at the table was simply to nod and admire. For Rachel, the moment was bittersweet. She wanted to believe her family was united in happiness, yet the patterns she had long recognized whispered beneath the clinking of glasses. Amanda's glance lingered on her too long. Linda's words tilted just enough to remind her of her lesser place, and Edward's toast felt more like an exaltation of one daughter at the subtle expense of the other. Rachel smiled warmly, offered her sincere congratulations, and hugged her sister tightly. But inside she felt the stirrings of something deeper than simple joy. This engagement was not only a milestone for Amanda, it was the opening of a new stage in the rivalry that had shadowed them for years. Even if Rachel did not seek competition, Amanda clearly did. As they left the restaurant that night, Rachel understood more clearly than ever that beneath the celebration, the unspoken contest between them had just been reignited, and the cost of keeping peace in the Carter family would soon become greater than she had ever imagined. The dinner celebrating Amanda's engagement marked the beginning of a new chapter, not only for her, but for the entire Carter family. In the weeks that followed, the excitement around wedding plans filled every conversation. Rachel, still holding on to a quiet hope that perhaps this moment would bring her and Amanda closer, was taken aback one evening when her sister approached her with a request that seemed almost generous. Amanda asked Rachel to be her maid of honor. For a moment, Rachel felt as though the years of rivalry and small resentments might finally be softening. The title carried a weight of tradition and intimacy, a symbol of trust between sisters. Tears had sprung unexpectedly to Rachel's eyes as she accepted. In that instant, she allowed herself to believe this wedding might be more than a stage for Amanda's insecurities. It might be an opportunity for reconciliation. The duties began almost immediately. Amanda, who had a binder of ideas and an endless list of Pinterest inspirations, leaned heavily on Rachel to execute them. Rachel threw herself into the work with the same dedication she applied to her design projects. She hand-painted invitations late into the night, her fingers aching, but her heart buoyed by the thought of doing something meaningful for her sister. She crafted delicate centerpieces, experimenting with bottles, fairy lights, and fresh flowers, until she found combinations that radiated warmth. She sketched layouts for reception decor, blending Amanda's scattered desires into something cohesive. Mark, her boyfriend, noticed the growing number of evenings she canceled their plans, but Rachel reassured him it was temporary. Amanda needed her, she said, and what was family if not sacrifice? As the months went on, Rachel's weekends disappeared into fittings, tastings, and planning sessions. She learned to juggle her demanding work schedule with Amanda's constant requests, sometimes staying up until 2 in the morning to finish client presentations because her evenings had been consumed with wedding crafts. Still, she convinced herself that it was worth it. Every carefully folded invitation and every late-night errand seemed like a brick laid in the fragile bridge she was trying to rebuild between herself and Amanda. But Amanda's gratitude was fleeting. If the bakery sent the wrong sample, Amanda collapsed into tears, declaring the entire wedding cursed. If a bridesmaid was late for a dress fitting due to work obligations, Amanda sulked for days, refusing to return her calls. At a cake tasting, Amanda rejected flavor after flavor with sharp criticism until the atmosphere grew tense and uncomfortable. Amanda's college friends, bridesmaids Jessica and Tara, exchanged uneasy glances, but said nothing. It was Rachel who smoothed over the awkward silences, patting Amanda's hand and assuring the baker it was just wedding stress. When Jessica whispered privately to Rachel, "Is she always like this?" Rachel forced a smile and shook her head. "It's just the pressure. She'll calm down." In truth, Rachel was beginning to see the pattern more clearly. Amanda's meltdowns were never random. They always came when attention drifted elsewhere. Each crisis pulled the spotlight back to her, casting Rachel in the role of steady caretaker. Rachel was the one making calls to vendors when Amanda refused, the one apologizing to bridesmaids after Amanda snapped at them, the one spinning stories to keep Amanda's reputation intact. And though Rachel told herself she was preserving harmony, she could not ignore the growing unease in her chest. She was becoming less a sister and more a shield, absorbing Amanda's frustrations and deflecting judgment from others. Mark noticed the toll as well. He commented gently one evening after Rachel had canceled another date night to finish hand-lettering place cards. "You're doing everything for this wedding. Doesn't Amanda have other people who can help?" Rachel brushed him off, insisting she was happy to do it. Yet a part of her recognized the truth in his words. Amanda's requests had stopped sounding like requests and more like expectations. The gratitude Rachel had glimpsed in the first few weeks had been replaced by a constant undercurrent of criticism and demands. If a ribbon color was off, Amanda sighed dramatically. If Rachel's suggestions were too creative, Amanda rolled her eyes, insisting it was not what she pictured. Each time Rachel adjusted, accommodating her sister's moods, believing that patience would eventually be rewarded with closeness. Still beneath the exhaustion and mounting frustration, Rachel clung to her hope. She reminded herself that weddings brought out the worst in people, that stress could twist even the kindest personality into something brittle. She repeated these reassurances like a mantra, even as she began to sense that she was not just helping with the wedding, but being used to hold it together entirely. Amanda's temper tantrums and tears drew sympathy from their parents, who once again rushed to soothe her. Rachel's efforts, meanwhile, were quietly expected, but rarely praised. When Linda praised Amanda for how beautifully the invitations turned out, Amanda accepted the compliment without mentioning that Rachel had spent hours bent over each envelope. Edward commented on Amanda's organizational skills, ignoring the fact that the binder of color-coded notes was largely Rachel's work. Rachel's heart ached at the familiar pattern, but she swallowed her feelings, convinced that keeping the peace mattered more. She smiled through Amanda's criticisms, laughed off her moods, and carried on with her tasks. To the outside world, Rachel appeared to be the supportive younger sister any bride would be lucky to have. But for those who looked closely, there were cracks in the facade. Jessica and Tara, Amanda's bridesmaids, began to recognize that Rachel's patience was not infinite. Mark, too, saw the weariness in Rachel's eyes even when she insisted she was fine. And the audience watching this chapter unfold could see what Rachel could not yet admit: she was being used. The role of maid of honor, which should have been a gesture of love and trust, had become another stage on which Rachel dimmed herself for Amanda's sake. What Rachel did not yet realize was that her sacrifices were only laying the groundwork for the deepest betrayal to come. The closer the wedding drew, the more cracks appeared in the fragile peace Rachel had worked so hard to maintain. She had taken her role as maid of honor seriously, throwing herself into every detail of the celebration. But Amanda's insecurities seemed to sharpen with each passing week. The first moment that truly unsettled Rachel came at a bridesmaid dress fitting. The boutique with softly lit mirrors lined the walls, and racks of gowns in dusty rose shades waited for the bridal party. When Rachel stepped out of the dressing room in a simple A-line gown with a sweetheart neckline, the shop owner clapped her hands together in delight, exclaiming how perfectly the color suited Rachel's complexion and how the cut flattered her tall, graceful frame. For a heartbeat, Rachel allowed herself to feel beautiful and perhaps even proud. But when she turned toward Amanda, expecting approval, she was met with tears. Amanda's face crumpled, and she declared through sobs that Rachel could not possibly wear such a dress. "Everyone will be looking at you instead of me," she cried, her voice carrying through the boutique until the room fell into awkward silence. Jessica and Tara froze uncertain, while the shop owner hurriedly excused herself to the back. Rachel tried to soothe Amanda, saying it was only a fitting and she could try another style, but Amanda shook her head furiously. Their mother, seated nearby in a plush chair, finally intervened, patting Amanda's hand and assuring her that Rachel would choose something less flattering. The phrasing stung, but Rachel bit her tongue. For the sake of peace, she agreed to a boxy, high-necked dress that drained the color from her face and did her figure no favors. Amanda immediately brightened, declaring it perfect. Rachel smiled tightly, though inside she felt the sting of yet another concession. Later that evening, Linda pulled Rachel aside in the kitchen as Amanda chatted loudly with bridesmaids in the next room. Lowering her voice, Linda told her daughter that Amanda's nerves were fragile. "This is her moment, Rachel," she said firmly. "She needs to shine. Would you consider wearing your hair up and going easy on the makeup? You know how easily attention falls on you." The words landed heavily. Rachel stared at her mother, stunned by the implication. It was not the first time she had been asked to step back, but hearing her mother frame her natural presence as a problem left her shaken. Still, she nodded, unwilling to create conflict so close to the wedding. She told herself it was a small compromise. Makeup could be subtle, hair could be pulled back. Perhaps if these adjustments kept Amanda calm, the day would go smoothly. The undercurrent of jealousy surfaced again during the bachelorette weekend, a trip Amanda had chosen to a vineyard resort. On the surface, it promised to be carefree massages, wine tastings, and laughter. Yet even there, Amanda's unease shadowed every activity. One evening, as they dressed for dinner, Amanda came up behind Rachel and ran her fingers through the long auburn waves that had become Rachel's signature. "Your hair is so pretty," Amanda said, her tone tight, her smile forced. "I've always been jealous of it, you know." Rachel offered a polite laugh, brushing the comment away, but Amanda continued, her voice dropping just enough to carry an edge. "David mentions it all the time. Says it reminds him of his ex. Isn't that funny?" Rachel froze, startled by both the comment and the venom behind it. She had never thought of David that way, had never wanted to. To hear Amanda bring him into the conversation, using him as a weapon against her, left her uneasy. She quickly changed the subject, but the atmosphere had shifted. The evening went on with clinking glasses and staged smiles, yet Rachel could not forget the bite in Amanda's voice, or the unsettling image it planted. The most painful moment of all came when Rachel accidentally overheard a conversation she was never meant to hear. Stepping outside late one night at the resort for fresh air, she rounded the corner of a balcony and stopped short at the sound of Amanda's voice. Her sister was speaking in hushed but urgent tones to their mother. "I just don't understand why she couldn't cut it," Amanda was saying. "Just for my wedding. She's always been selfish about her appearance." Linda's reply was soft but carried enough disdain to pierce Rachel's heart. "You know how she is. She had to be the prettiest one even at your graduation party." Amanda sighed angrily. "Everyone will be looking at her walking down the aisle with that hair. She'll steal my spotlight just by existing." Rachel stood frozen in the shadows, her breath caught. She remembered her sister's graduation, how deliberately she had worn a simple sundress and light makeup so as not to draw attention. Yet here was her mother and sister rewriting the past and plotting against her for something as natural as the hair that grew on her head. She slipped back inside before they could notice her, her chest tight with hurt. Lying awake that night, Rachel replayed every comment, every moment of tension, and began to see her family's behavior in a new, troubling light. The whispers in the boutique, the request to tone herself down, Amanda's barbed remarks, and now the balcony conversation formed a pattern that was impossible to ignore. The jealousy once hidden was now spilling into words and plans. Rachel could not yet imagine how far they would go, but the red flags had been planted clearly in her mind, warning her of a storm ahead. The rehearsal dinner was meant to be a warm prelude to the big day, a gathering where friends and family could relax, raise a glass, and celebrate the love between Amanda and David. The restaurant had reserved a private room overlooking the river, its walls draped in white linens and the air filled with the scent of garlic and basil from the kitchen. Rachel arrived early as always, helping the coordinator adjust table placements and ensuring that the candles were lit just before guests entered. She wore a modest dress in forest green, elegant but understated, determined to fulfill her duties without attracting undue attention. When Amanda and David arrived, Amanda in a white lace mini dress and David in a crisp navy suit, all eyes turned to them as expected. For a little while, Rachel allowed herself to hope the evening would remain smooth, that her sister's anxiety might rest for just one night. The meal began with laughter and polite conversation, wine glasses clinking as plates of pasta and seafood were passed around. Guests shared stories about David's childhood antics and Amanda's college adventures, and for a brief moment, the atmosphere felt light. Rachel stayed attentive but quiet, content to support the evening from the background. Then came the moment that changed everything. When the plates were cleared and the room grew hushed, the best man Ryan rose to give his toast. He spoke warmly of David, recounting their college years together, the long nights of studying, the pranks they played on each other, and the loyalty David had always shown. Everyone smiled, nodding along until Ryan leaned casually on his glass and added a line that froze the room. "I'll never forget," he said with a grin the first time David saw Amanda at that work event. He said, "She's pretty, but did you see her sister?" A silence fell as if the air itself had been cut. The laughter died instantly, and eyes darted to Amanda, whose smile had already collapsed into a brittle line. David's face flushed crimson, his hand shooting out to tug at Ryan's sleeve, as if he could pull the words back into his mouth. Rachel's stomach dropped, the weight of the moment pressing on her chest. In an instant, she understood the danger. Amanda's deepest insecurity had just been spoken aloud in public by someone who thought he was sharing a harmless anecdote. Rachel could see the tension radiating from her sister, the humiliation rising like heat. Without hesitation, she rose to her feet, forcing a calm smile onto her face. Lifting her glass, she spoke with measured warmth. "What Ryan means," she said gently, "is that David recognized very quickly how special Amanda is inside and out. Their connection was undeniable from the start, and it's why we're all here tonight." She held her glass high, inviting others to join. After a beat, the room responded, voices echoing in relief as the toast shifted back to celebration. Guests raised their glasses, conversation resumed, and the awkward moment seemed to dissolve into the flow of the evening. But Amanda's expression told another story. She stared at her plate, her lips pressed so tightly they seemed bloodless. Rachel sat down quietly, her hands trembling beneath the tablecloth, trying to focus on the clinking of glasses and the murmurs of resumed chatter. She had saved her sister from open embarrassment, but she knew Amanda would not see it that way. Sure enough, when the dinner ended and guests began drifting out, Amanda cornered her by the dessert table. Her voice was sharp, low, almost venomous. "You just couldn't help yourself, could you?" she hissed. Rachel blinked, startled. "Amanda, I was trying to save you." Ryan's comment. "Don't lie," Amanda snapped. "You loved it. You loved hearing that David noticed you first. You couldn't resist jumping in to make yourself look better." Rachel's mouth fell open in disbelief. "That's not true. I wanted to protect you." But Amanda wasn't listening. Her eyes blazed with anger, her words laced with resentment that had clearly been festering for years. "You've been trying to outshine me this entire time. Every detail, every suggestion, every one of your perfect little touches. You always have to steal the spotlight." Before Rachel could respond, their mother appeared, drawn by the rising tension. Linda placed a firm hand on Rachel's arm, her voice hushed but commanding. "Girls not here. Amanda, it's your night. Rachel, help your sister say goodbye to the guests." Rachel swallowed her protest, her throat tight with unshed words. She smiled mechanically as she stood beside Amanda at the door, bidding farewell to relatives and friends, as though nothing had happened. Amanda clung to David's arm, her laugh pitched high and brittle while David looked uneasy, but said nothing. Edward lingered nearby, nodding approvingly at Amanda, but barely glancing at Rachel. The message was clear once again: when conflict arose, the family would side with Amanda. By the time Rachel returned to her parents' house that evening, her jaw ached from holding her smile in place. Upstairs, she changed into pajamas and sat on the edge of her childhood bed, staring at the trophies and photographs that still decorated the shelves. For years, she had convinced herself that keeping the peace was worth the cost, that making herself smaller was the price of harmony. But as she replayed the events of the rehearsal dinner, the unfairness pressed down on her with suffocating weight. She had stepped in to protect her sister, only to be accused, dismissed, and silenced. In that moment, Rachel felt not only the sting of Amanda's anger, but the deeper wound of her parents' betrayal. The very people who should have defended her had once again chosen to shield Amanda, leaving Rachel alone with the growing realization that the family she had sacrificed so much to protect would never stand up for her in return. That night, after the tension of the rehearsal dinner and the ache of standing silently at her sister's side, Rachel returned to her parents' house drained in both body and spirit. Her childhood bedroom had been turned into a guest room, but traces of the past remained framed: debate team ribbons, faded photographs, a corkboard still tacked with acceptance letters. She slipped into pajamas, brushed her teeth mechanically, and swallowed a small over-the-counter sleep aid, hoping to quiet the thoughts racing through her head. Lying down, she pulled the quilt over her and closed her eyes. Exhaustion pressed down on her quickly, but somewhere in the fog of half-sleep, she felt something strange. There was a faint tugging at her scalp, the brush of fingers against her hair. She stirred weakly, but the sedative kept her heavy, unable to rise fully to consciousness. Voices murmured low nearby, too soft to distinguish. For a moment she wondered if she was dreaming. Then the heaviness pulled her under again, and she did not wake until morning. The light of day brought no peace. Rachel stirred with a peculiar sensation, her head feeling lighter, the pillow oddly bare. She reached up instinctively to push her hair from her face and froze. Her fingers met nothing but uneven tufts, short strands sticking out at harsh angles. Bolting upright, she stumbled to the mirror on the dresser, her breath catching in her throat. What stared back at her was a butchered reflection she hardly recognized. Her long auburn hair, the hair she had nurtured for more than a decade, was gone. In its place was a jagged mess, some sections hacked close to the scalp, others hanging unevenly at chin length. Her scalp showed in patches where the scissors had bitten too deeply. For a long moment she could not comprehend what she was seeing. Then the horror struck her in waves so fierce she could barely breathe. Tears blurred her eyes as she grabbed desperately at the ragged ends, whispering no over and over again as if denial could undo it. In a haze of disbelief, she stumbled into the hallway, searching for some rational explanation. That was when she saw the small bathroom trash can. Peeking from beneath tissues and an empty toothpaste box were long auburn strands bundled together carelessly. Her stomach turned, her knees weakened. It was not a nightmare. It was deliberate. Rage and devastation collided in her chest as she marched downstairs, fists clenched around the jagged remains of her once beautiful hair. At the kitchen table sat her parents drinking coffee as if it were any ordinary morning. The casual sight of them nearly undid her. "What did you do to me?" she demanded, her voice trembling with fury. Linda barely looked up, her expression calm, almost satisfied. "We knew you wouldn't agree if we asked," she said smoothly, as though explaining away something trivial. "This is justice for Amanda's big day." Rachel's mouth fell open. Justice. The word echoed like poison. You cut my hair in my sleep, she said, her voice rising, without my permission. Edward shifted slightly in his chair, his gaze cool, detached. It's just hair, Rachel, he said flatly. Now maybe someone will finally pity you. The cruelty of it stole her breath. They had not only taken from her, they had mocked her pain as though it were deserved. Her body shook as she clutched at the jagged ends near her neck. You violated me, she cried. You had no right. But her parents only stared back, their expressions a mixture of pity and annoyance, as if she were being unreasonable. They truly believed they were justified. Rachel's heart pounded so hard she thought it might burst. She turned and ran back upstairs, her hands trembling as she dialed Amanda's number. When her sister answered, Rachel's voice broke. You knew, didn't you? She demanded. There was a pause, a hesitation that confirmed what Rachel already suspected. Then Amanda's voice came dripping with satisfaction. I thought maybe they'd just trim it, she said with a shrug. Rachel could hear even through the phone. But honestly, at least now people will actually look at me tomorrow instead of you. Rachel's tears ran hot down her face as Amanda's laugh echoed faintly before the line went dead. Standing in her room with the phone slipping from her hand, Rachel felt the weight of the betrayal crush down with unbearable force. This was not just jealousy. This was collusion. The sister she had spent months sacrificing for the parents she had tried so hard to please had joined together in the night to strip her of something deeply personal, all for the sake of Amanda's insecurities. The hair that had been part of her identity, grown and cherished for years, had been hacked away without consent, discarded in the trash like refuse. And they expected her to accept it, to swallow the humiliation, to smile through her sister's vows, as if nothing had happened. In that moment, Rachel knew something inside her had shifted permanently. Whatever ties had bound her to the illusion of family loyalty had been severed as ruthlessly as her hair. She would never look at them the same way again. Rachel stood in the wreckage of her room, the mirror reflecting the jagged remains of her hair and the phone still buzzing with unanswered calls from her parents. Her chest heaved with sobs that seemed to come from somewhere deeper than she knew existed. With trembling fingers she dialed Mark. The moment he heard her voice thick with tears, his tone sharpened with urgency. "Stay where you are," he said firmly. "I'm coming right now." Within half an hour his car pulled into the driveway. He did not bother with pleasantries or greetings to her parents downstairs. He went straight up to her room, his face darkening as soon as he saw her. Without a word, he wrapped his arms around her, holding her until her shaking began to ease. "They did this to you," he murmured, his voice low with controlled fury. "It's not just cruel, Rachel. It's an assault. You don't have to stay here another minute." Rachel clung to him, the decision already made in her heart. With Mark at her side, she gathered her suitcase and left the house that had ceased to feel like home. At his apartment, the silence felt like a sanctuary. Mark made her tea, setting it gently on the table before pulling out his phone. "I'm calling Sophie," he said. Rachel blinked, momentarily confused, before remembering her friend Sophie, a stylist whose artistry had salvaged many disasters for clients. Sophie was more than a stylist. She was family by choice, a confidant who had stood by Rachel since their college years. Within an hour, Sophie arrived, her professional kit in tow. When she caught sight of Rachel's butchered hair, she drew in a sharp breath. "Oh, honey," she whispered, circling her gently as though inspecting a wound. "This isn't just bad. It's malicious." "Who did this?" Rachel's throat tightened. "My parents," she said hoarsely. "For Amanda. So I wouldn't steal her spotlight." Sophie's eyes blazed, but her hands remained steady. "Then we're going to take their cruelty and turn it into art." Rachel sat stiffly in the chair as Sophie began to work. With each snip of the scissors, the uneven ends disappeared, replaced by purposeful lines. Sophie murmured as she worked, her voice calm but fierce. "We can't bring back the length right now, but we can create something strong, something intentional. A pixie cut. It'll frame your face, show off your eyes. You'll look powerful." Rachel's stomach twisted at the thought. She had hidden behind her long hair for so many years it felt like part of her very identity. But as the minutes passed, she felt the weight of the damage lift, replaced by something sharper, more deliberate. When Sophie finally spun her toward the mirror, Rachel gasped. Gone was the girl with waist-length waves. In her place was a woman with sharp cheekbones, bright green eyes, and an edge that demanded attention. She reached up to touch the short layers, her fingers brushing the textured style Sophie had crafted. "I look different," she whispered. Sophie squeezed her shoulder gently. "Not different, stronger. They tried to take something from you, but all they did was uncover a version of you they'll never control." Mark had been watching silently from the corner, his camera already in hand. "You look incredible," he said softly. "Let me take a few photos. Not for them, for you." Rachel hesitated, but then nodded. He began snapping pictures, capturing her from every angle. In some, her expression was fierce, in others, quietly reflective. When he showed her the shots, she barely recognized herself. She looked composed, elegant, unbroken. With her permission, Mark chose one of the portraits and posted it on his social media with a simple caption: "Unexpected changes sometimes reveal unexpected strength." Within minutes, the comments poured in. Friends, colleagues, and even distant acquaintances flooded the post with messages of admiration. "This cut is made for you. You look unstoppable, strong and beautiful." The outpouring washed over Rachel like a balm, each word a reminder that her worth was not tied to her hair, nor to her family's twisted attempts to control her. When the evening quieted, Sophie packed up her tools and kissed Rachel on the cheek. "They thought they could humiliate you," she said firmly, "but they gave you a new crown instead." Rachel remained in front of the mirror long after Sophie left, studying the reflection of the woman staring back at her. She saw her own high cheekbones, her luminous eyes, the sleek edge of the pixie cut that seemed to speak of resilience rather than loss. For years she had bent herself smaller to protect Amanda, sacrificed her light for the sake of peace. But here now she saw something undeniable. They had not destroyed her. They had revealed her. She traced the curve of her jaw with her fingers and felt a quiet strength rising within her. "They can't ruin me," she murmured to her reflection. "They only created a stronger version." For the first time in years, Rachel smiled at herself in the mirror, not with apology or hesitation, but with the certainty of someone who had begun to reclaim her power. The night after Sophie transformed her ruined hair into a sharp pixie cut, Rachel lay awake in Mark's apartment staring at the ceiling as plans began to take shape in her mind. For years she had responded to her family's cruelty with silence, sacrificing her own dignity to preserve a fragile illusion of harmony. But now, staring at her reflection and seeing strength rather than shame, she understood that this was her moment to reclaim control. If Amanda and her parents thought she would quietly accept humiliation, they had underestimated her. She would not disrupt the wedding with petty scenes or dramatic outbursts, but she would make sure the truth was undeniable and her own presence impossible to ignore. Her revenge would not be chaos. It would be elegance, clarity, and power. The first step came the following afternoon. Rachel walked into a department store and bypassed the rows of dresses she had once gravitated toward. Instead, she headed straight for the designer suits. With the help of a salesperson, she tried on a tailored ivory tuxedo, its slim-cut pants and fitted jacket sculpting her frame with precision. She stood in front of the mirror, her new haircut accentuating the bold lines of the outfit, and for the first time she felt as though she were dressing not to diminish herself, but to be seen. The ivory fabric caught the light soft yet commanding a quiet declaration that she was no longer content to fade into the background. Mark whistled low when she stepped out of the fitting room. "You look powerful," he said simply. Rachel turned back to the mirror and nodded. "That's exactly how I want to feel." The second step was to control the story before Amanda's family could twist it. That evening, Rachel dialed David's parents. She had met them several times during engagement celebrations and sensed they were kind, reasonable people. When David's mother answered cheerfully, Rachel steadied her voice. "Mrs. Miller, it's Rachel. I know tomorrow is supposed to be nothing but joyful, but there's something I need to tell you before you hear it in fragments or gossip." She explained carefully what had happened, how her parents had cut her hair without consent, and how Amanda had known in advance. She did not embellish or dramatize. She simply laid out the facts. On the other end of the line, Mrs. Miller gasped in horror. That's unthinkable," she said finally. "Does David know?" Rachel hesitated. "Not yet. And I don't intend to cause trouble for him tomorrow. I just wanted you to understand why I might not be standing where you expect me to." There was a pause, then Mrs. Miller's voice softened. "Thank you for trusting us with this. And Rachel, I am so sorry for what you've endured. You will always be welcome in our family." Rachel blinked back tears. It was the validation she had needed, proof that not everyone accepted Amanda's warped sense of justice. The third step was to ensure that whatever unfolded at the wedding would not be distorted after the fact. For that, she turned to Jason, an old friend and professional photographer who had once offered to shoot Amanda's wedding before being brushed aside in favor of a more expensive vendor. When Rachel explained her situation, Jason agreed instantly. "I'll attend as a guest," he said, quiet in the background. "I'll capture candid moments. If anything happens, you'll have a record no one can dispute." His reassurance gave Rachel a sense of security she had not felt in days. For once, she would not be at the mercy of her family's narrative. She would have evidence of her own. The fourth step was the most personal. Late that night, Rachel sat at Mark's desk with pen and paper writing a letter to Amanda that she knew her sister would read eventually. The words came slowly at first, then poured out. She described years of shrinking herself to preserve Amanda's comfort, of swallowing her pride to keep peace in the family. She did not rant or accuse. Instead, she wrote with clarity. "You do not have the right to diminish me in order to feel brighter yourself," she wrote. "I am your sister, not your shadow. My worth does not threaten yours. Your insecurities are not my burden to carry." She signed her name with a steady hand and sealed the letter in an envelope. It was not a plea for reconciliation, but a declaration of boundaries Amanda could no longer ignore. The final step was to remind herself and everyone else that she was still capable of grace. Despite everything, she wanted to show that she would not be dragged down to bitterness. Weeks earlier, before the betrayal, she had commissioned a local artist to create a watercolor of the wedding venue, capturing its ivy-covered stone walls and sprawling gardens. She had nearly forgotten about it, but now she saw its potential as the perfect wedding gift. She had it wrapped carefully in silver paper and attached a small note. "May your marriage be built on respect, honesty, and love." It was a message layered with meaning, a reminder of the values Amanda had failed to embody, yet offered without venom. When she placed it beside the sealed letter, Rachel felt a surge of calm. Her plan was complete. By the time she set the pen down, Rachel was no longer trembling. She looked at the ivory suit hanging neatly on the closet door, the sealed envelope waiting to be delivered, the painting wrapped with care. Every piece of the plan reflected a choice she had made not to be silenced or humiliated. Her family had taken her hair, but they had not taken her strength. They had underestimated her resolve, assuming she would either collapse or comply. Instead, she would arrive at the wedding on her own terms, not as a victim, but as a woman who had decided at last to step out of the shadows. The morning of the wedding dawned bright and clear, sunlight streaming through the windows of Mark's apartment as Rachel buttoned the ivory suit jacket that had become her armor. She applied her makeup with a steady hand. Nothing ostentatious, just enough to highlight her cheekbones and the brightness of her eyes beneath the new pixie cut. When she looked in the mirror, she no longer saw the girl who had been mutilated in her sleep. She saw a woman stepping into her own power. With Mark by her side, she drove to the venue earlier than expected, determined to arrive on her own terms rather than waiting to be summoned. The historic mansion, with its ivy-covered walls and sprawling gardens, was already buzzing with staff, and the wedding coordinator looked nearly frantic when Rachel appeared. "Thank God you're here," she whispered, thrusting a clipboard into Rachel's hands. The florist delivered the wrong shade of roses, and Amanda is beside herself. Rachel studied the flowers, calmly suggested a few adjustments with greenery and placement, and within minutes transformed the tables into something even lovelier than the original plan. The coordinator looked at her with relief. "You just saved us," she said. Rachel only smiled, her presence steady and sure. As guests began to arrive for the pre-ceremony brunch, heads turned almost immediately. Rachel moved gracefully among the tables, adjusting small details and greeting familiar faces. Compliments came quickly, not just for her decor, but for her appearance. "Your haircut is stunning," one aunt remarked warmly. "So chic." A family friend touched her arm and said, "That style was made for you." Rachel accepted the words with quiet gratitude, each compliment striking at the very heart of what her parents and Amanda had tried to erase. Far from humiliation, the haircut had become a statement. It made her stand out not as a rival, but as someone who carried herself with elegance. She could see Amanda's friends whispering to each other, eyes wide, and even the bridesmaids Jessica and Tara approached her with genuine admiration. "You look incredible," Tara said. "It suits you perfectly." Rachel thanked them, her smile calm but purposeful. Every kind word was a silent victory. When Amanda finally entered the garden with Linda and Edward close behind her, reaction was instant. Her mouth fell open, her face shifting from shock to fury as she took in Rachel's ivory suit and sharp haircut. "What are you doing?" she hissed, striding across the lawn. "Where's the wig?" Rachel straightened her expression, unflinching. "I decided not to wear one," she said evenly. "This is who I am now." Amanda's voice rose shrill enough to draw the attention of nearby guests. "You're trying to ruin my wedding. You cut your hair even shorter just to make a scene." Rachel's heart pounded, but she stood her ground. "I didn't cut it, Amanda. You know exactly what happened. I'm simply making the best of it." Amanda's face flushed crimson. Linda quickly stepped forward, placing a hand on her daughter's arm, but glaring at Rachel. "This is selfish," she snapped. "Amanda asked for one simple thing, and you can't even do that for her. Put on the wig or leave." Edward's voice was colder still. "You've caused enough damage already." Before Rachel could reply, another voice broke in, calm but firm. David's mother, Carol Miller, who had been listening nearby, stepped closer. Her expression was kind but unyielding. "I think Rachel looks very elegant," she said clearly, her words carrying enough weight to still the whispers around them. "There is no need for her to cover herself with a wig. She has every right to be here as she is." The effect was immediate. Guests turned their attention toward Carol, whose standing in the community was respected. Linda's mouth tightened. Edward's jaw worked in silence, and Amanda's fury faltered momentarily, checked by the unexpected defense. The fragile equilibrium did not last long. David, who had been speaking with groomsmen nearby, walked over at the sound of raised voices. His brow furrowed as he looked between the women. "What's going on?" he asked, confusion clouding his features. Carol laid a hand on her son's arm. "David, you need to know something," she said gently. Rachel's hair wasn't a choice. It was taken from her. "She told me last night, and I believe her." David turned sharply toward Amanda, his eyes narrowing. "Is that true?" For a moment, Amanda stammered, her confidence gone. I don't know what she told you," she began, but her voice wavered. Rachel met his gaze, calm but unwavering. "Your fiancé knew they were planning it," she said. "I woke up with my hair hacked off David. Ask her if she tried to stop it." Amanda's mouth opened, but no words came. Her silence spoke louder than any denial. The air grew heavy as David's face registered the dawning horror. Around them the chatter of guests dimmed, replaced by uneasy glances and murmured speculation. Amanda tried to laugh it off, but the sound was brittle, unconvincing. "It was just wedding stress," she said weakly. "We thought it would help." But her words fell flat, the damage already done. David's eyes did not leave her face, and in that moment Rachel knew that for the first time her sister could not twist the truth to her advantage. What had been hidden in the shadows was now dragged into the light, and the wedding day had barely begun. The tension that had simmered all morning finally erupted when Amanda, still flushed from the confrontation about Rachel's hair, strode to the center of the bridal suite with her voice pitched loud enough for half the room to hear. "I can't do this anymore," she declared, her hands trembling as she gestured toward Rachel. "You're not my maid of honor anymore. Jessica will take over." For a moment, silence reigned. Jessica, one of Amanda's longtime friends and a bridesmaid since the start, looked startled, her eyes widening as she clutched the hem of her dress. "Wait, what?" she stammered. "Amanda, this is the morning of the wedding. You can't just—" But Amanda cut her off sharply. "I can and I am. I refuse to have my day ruined by someone who only wants attention." All eyes shifted to Rachel, who stood still, her ivory suit immaculate, her pixie cut sharp against the morning light streaming through the windows. Instead of protesting, she drew in a slow breath and simply nodded. "If that's what you want, Amanda," she said quietly. Then she moved aside her poise, unshaken, and picked up a stack of programs to hand to the coordinator. Her calmness was unnerving, a stark contrast to Amanda's raw agitation. The shift was palpable. Where Amanda had expected Rachel to argue or storm out, she instead watched her sister glide through the room, offering small bits of help where needed. She adjusted centerpieces, greeted guests with quiet warmth, and even reassured the florist who was still fretting about the roses. By refusing to engage in a public battle, Rachel's restraint only magnified Amanda's outburst. Whispers began at the edges of the room, guests exchanging glances that carried more weight than words. Jessica, still rattled, tried to pull Amanda aside, murmuring that the decision looked rash, but Amanda brushed her off. Her jaw clenched tight. The harder Amanda pushed, the more composed Rachel became, and the contrast did not go unnoticed. As brunch unfolded, a few curious guests approached Rachel discreetly. One older relative leaned in and asked softly, "Honey, why isn't Amanda letting you stand with her? What happened?" Rachel's eyes met hers calmly, and she answered with just one sentence. "My parents cut my hair while I slept." The relative blinked, stunned. Rachel said nothing more. The brevity of her answer carried more weight than any elaboration could. Soon another cousin asked, and Rachel repeated the same words with the same quiet dignity. "My parents cut my hair while I slept." Each time she left it at that, resisting the urge to explain or defend. Her restraint gave her statement a chilling gravity, as though the simplicity of it revealed its own horror. By the third time, the whispers had spread like wildfire. Guests who had not heard directly from Rachel began murmuring to each other, disbelief etched on their faces. "Did you hear what she said? That her parents—" "While she was sleeping. That can't be real." Yet the jagged truth of Rachel's cropped hair offered all the confirmation anyone needed. The energy in the room shifted from light chatter to uneasy buzz. People clustered in corners, glancing at Amanda and then back at Rachel, their expressions torn between shock and disapproval. Some looked toward Linda and Edward with thinly veiled suspicion, their polite facades cracking under the weight of what they had just learned. Rachel kept moving steadily, offering small smiles, pouring coffee for an elderly aunt, never once raising her voice or adding fuel to the growing storm. The more she embodied grace, the more her family's cruelty became undeniable by contrast. Across the room, David had been watching quietly. At first, he seemed merely unsettled by Amanda's decision to dismiss her sister so suddenly. But as the whispers reached him and Carol leaned in to repeat Rachel's words, his expression hardened. He walked toward Amanda, who was laughing too loudly at something Jessica had said, the sound brittle and forced. "Amanda," David said firmly, his voice low but audible to those nearest. "Is it true? Did your parents really cut Rachel's hair while she was sleeping?" Amanda's laughter died instantly. Her eyes darted to Rachel, then to her mother, then back to David. It's not what she makes it sound like," she stammered. "She's being dramatic." But David did not look away. His eyes held hers with a sharpness Rachel had never seen before, and Amanda faltered under the weight of his gaze. "Just answer me," he pressed quietly. "Is it true?" Amanda hesitated, her mouth opening and closing as though words might save her, but none came. That hesitation was answer enough. The room grew quieter, the whispers now joined by glances of pity toward Rachel and thinly veiled disapproval toward Amanda. For Rachel, standing across the room with programs in her hands, the moment felt like a tide turning. She had not needed to scream or fight. The truth had slipped into the open with only a few calm words, and now it spread on its own, leaving Amanda and their parents scrambling to hold together an image that no longer matched reality. David's eyes lingered on his bride-to-be with doubt etched deep in his features, and Rachel knew the cracks in their carefully built facade were no longer private. They were public, undeniable, and spreading wider by the minute. The reception hall glittered with soft lights and the hum of conversation as guests settled into their seats. Rachel moved quietly through the room in her ivory suit, not seeking attention but somehow drawing it all the same. When the time came for toasts, the coordinator gestured toward her, and Rachel rose with calm composure. She held her glass steadily, her voice carrying just enough to command the room without force. "Marriage," she began, "is not about one person diminishing the other to feel strong. It's about respect, honesty, and the courage to lift each other up. If you spend your energy trying to break down the person you love, you don't create happiness, you destroy it. True partnership comes from seeing one another clearly and supporting growth even when it challenges you." Her words lingered in the air, deceptively simple yet unmistakably pointed. Many guests nodded thoughtfully, some exchanging glances, and though Rachel never mentioned Amanda by name, everyone understood the deeper meaning. David sat frozen, his eyes lowered while Amanda's smile stiffened into a strained mask. As Rachel lowered her glass, a ripple of murmurs passed through the room. Compliments floated toward her almost immediately. "That haircut suits you so well," one guest whispered with admiration. "It takes confidence to wear something like that," another added warmly. Even women Rachel barely knew leaned across tables to tell her she looked radiant, strong, even chic. Each kind word struck Amanda like a silent blow. From her seat at the head table, Amanda's expression hardened, the brightness of her carefully constructed image dimming with every passing remark. Her jaw clenched as she watched the sister she had tried to diminish receive praise for the very thing meant to humiliate her. The evening continued, music playing softly as the bridal party prepared for the bouquet toss. Amanda took her place in the center of the dance floor, the bouquet clutched tightly in her hands, her eyes flicking toward Rachel with something almost venomous. As the crowd of women gathered behind her, she gave a sharp little smirk and flung the bouquet with unnecessary force, deliberately aiming it in Rachel's direction. Gasps rose as the flowers sailed through the air. Rachel, standing near the edge of the group, caught the bouquet with ease, her movements graceful and unflustered. For a brief second, the room held its breath. Then, instead of clutching the prize triumphantly, Rachel turned, knelt down, and placed the bouquet into the hands of a wide-eyed little girl in the crowd. The child squealed with delight, clutching the flowers to her chest, and the guests erupted in applause. The room filled with laughter and cheers, the innocence of the gesture disarming the tension completely. Rachel smiled, gave the girl a gentle pat on the shoulder, and stepped aside with quiet dignity. The applause that followed was genuine and warm, but Amanda's face flushed with fury. What she had meant as humiliation had become another moment of admiration for Rachel. The breaking point came soon after. Amanda, overwhelmed by the weight of the whispers and the applause she could not control, burst into tears. Her voice rose above the music as she pointed an accusatory finger at Rachel. "She's ruining everything," she cried, her sobs echoing through the hall. "This was supposed to be my day and she's turned it into hers. She always does. This always has to steal the attention." The guests fell into shocked silence, the outburst laying bare the insecurity Amanda had tried so hard to conceal. Some shifted uncomfortably in their chairs, others exchanged knowing looks, and a few shook their heads with pity. It was no longer Rachel who appeared to be the problem. It was Amanda unraveling in front of the very people she had wanted so badly to impress. Rachel did not argue. She did not defend herself. She merely straightened her shoulders, her face composed, and placed her napkin neatly on the table. Mark rose with her, his hand steady at her back as they crossed the hall together. Heads turned, eyes following them not with judgment, but with respect. Rachel's stride was unhurried, her chin lifted, her dignity intact. As they reached the door, she glanced once more at the room she was leaving behind. Guests murmuring, Amanda still weeping. David standing stiffly beside her with a look of disillusion etched deep into his features. Then she turned away, stepping into the night with her head held high. The days that followed the wedding were filled with an aftermath no one could have anticipated. 3 mornings later, the local newspaper carried a feature article titled, Wedding Trauma When Family Boundaries Are Crossed, penned by a human interest columnist who had caught wind of the whispers circulating through town. Without naming the family directly, the story recounted the shocking detail of a young woman's hair being cut while she slept, in order to keep her from outshining her sister on her wedding day. The article included commentary from therapists who condemned the act as a violation of personal autonomy and dignity. The piece spread quickly online, picked up by regional outlets, and shared across social media. Strangers weighed in, some expressing outrage, others confessing similar experiences of family betrayal. For the first time, the toxic patterns that Rachel had lived with in silence were being held to public scrutiny. Meanwhile, the newlyweds' honeymoon never began. David stayed with his parents rather than boarding the plane to Barbados. He told Amanda he needed time to reflect on the kind of marriage he had entered into and what it meant that his wife had allowed such a violation of her own sister. Amanda's protests fell on deaf ears. He moved into his old bedroom, leaving Amanda to return alone to the house they had rented together. The once confident bride was suddenly left to face questions from friends and neighbors about why her husband had not traveled with her. Her explanations grew increasingly brittle as rumors swirled that David might not be committed to the union at all. Linda and Edward faced their own reckoning. The community that had once admired their polished image as upright parents and professionals now looked at them with suspicion. Neighbors who had shared coffee with Linda after PTA meetings avoided her in the grocery store. Clients whispered about Edward's callousness. For a man whose business depended on trust, the damage to his reputation was a wound not easily healed. They dismissed the article as exaggeration at first, but the silent condemnation they encountered daily could not be ignored. The couple who had once basked in their own sense of superiority now found themselves isolated in the very town where they had tried to maintain their perfect facade. Amanda fared no better. Alone in her rented house and facing a husband who had grown distant, she spiraled into a period of crisis. David, steadfast, despite his disappointment, insisted she begin therapy if she hoped to repair not only their marriage, but her own understanding of self. Reluctantly, Amanda complied, though her early sessions were filled with defensiveness. Over time, however, the weight of her own choices pressed on her. Months later, Rachel received a letter in Amanda's handwriting. The words were halting, awkward, but carried the first signs of reflection. Amanda admitted to being consumed by jealousy for years, though she stopped short of fully acknowledging the cruelty of her actions. "I know the haircut went too far," she wrote. "I thought it would make me feel better, but it didn't. It only showed me how empty I felt inside." It was not the wholehearted apology Rachel might have wished for, but it was the beginning of accountability. She read the letter quietly, feeling no urge to reply immediately, knowing that forgiveness, if it came, would be on her own terms. While her family floundered, Rachel's own life blossomed in ways she could not have foreseen. At the design firm, her colleagues admired the pixie cut, calling it bold and professional, and new clients were drawn to her confidence. Projects began to pour in, each more prestigious than the last. At home, she and Mark found a sunny apartment with enough space for both her design work and his photography. They filled it with warmth, laughter, and the quiet rituals of daily life that made her realize she had built a new kind of family, one chosen, not imposed. A year later, when Mark knelt on one knee in the garden they had cultivated together on their balcony, she said yes without hesitation, her heart free of the doubts that had once tethered her to her parents' approval. On the morning she slipped on her engagement ring for the first time, Rachel stood before the mirror that had once reflected only loss and humiliation. The pixie cut had grown into a chic bob, a style she kept deliberately as a reminder of where her strength had begun. She thought of the girl she had been lying half asleep as scissors tore through her hair and realized she was no longer that girl. She was a woman who had endured betrayal and emerged stronger. Her family had tried to cut away her light to diminish her until she was no more than a shadow. Instead, their cruelty had forced her to discover a brilliance she had never known she carried. She smiled softly at her reflection, whispering to herself the truth she now understood. They tried to take away my light, but all they did was help me find my true strength. Rachel's story shows us how betrayal can come from the people we least expect, yet strength can rise from the darkest of places. A sister's jealousy, parents' favoritism, and a desperate act meant to humiliate her ended up forging a woman who stood taller than ever before. She turned cruelty into courage, shame into dignity, and silence into a voice that could not be ignored. In the end, Rachel discovered something that many of us struggle to learn: true love and true family are not measured by blood or appearances, but by respect, honesty, and support. Now, I'd love to hear from you. Have you ever faced a moment when family pressure or betrayal pushed you to stand up for yourself in ways you never thought possible? What did it teach you about strength, about boundaries, or about love? Share your thoughts in the comments below, because your story might be the one that inspires someone else to find their own voice. If Rachel's journey resonated with you, don't forget to hit the subscribe button and turn on notifications so you won't miss the next story of drama, revenge, and resilience. And if you found value in this video, give it a like. It really helps this community grow. Remember, even when others try to dim your light, you hold the power to shine brighter than ever.